The twin suns of Ulysses Prime cast a red glow over the great arena. Tens of thousands of aliens from every corner of the Empire gathered to witness the duel. It was not just a fight, it was tradition. Honor and law. Princess Valara stood tall in her royal balcony. Her silver crown gleaming, she was cold, proud, and feared across the galaxy. Beside her stood her loyal maids, cloaked in royal silks, their eyes fixed on the battlefield. This was no ordinary day. Her champion, Kroger the Titan, was about to defend her honor against an unknown challenger, human from Earth. The arena gate opened with a thunderous groan. Kroger stepped out first. Standing over 8 feet tall, muscles like stone armor made from the bones of beasts he had slain, he raised his axe, and the crowd erupted in wild cheers. He had never been defeated, not once. He had crushed entire rebel armies with one hand. Too many, he was a god of war, and today, he would once again prove why he was the strongest in the Empire. Then came the human. The second gate opened slowly, and from the shadows walked a man tall by human standards. But small compared to Kroger, he wore no heavy armor, just a light suit and a single longsword strapped to his back. The crowd fell silent, confused, some laughed, and others scoffed. Was this a joke? Was the human suicidal? Princess Valara narrowed. Her eyes, she had not expected this. Where was his armor? Or was his backup? Even his sword looked too thin to do any real damage. This couldn't be serious, could it? But the human didn't flinch. He walked to the center of the arena and stood still, calm, silent, watching Kroger with eyes like steel. The announcer's voice echoed across the arena. By ancient law, the one who wins this duel shall claim the royal house of Princess Valara. The crowd screamed in excitement. The rules were clear. If this strange human defeated Kroger, he would have the right to claim the princess and her maids under the law of conquest, but everyone already knew the outcome. Kroger would win. Of course, he always did. A deep horn sounded, marking the start of the duel. Kroger roared. Lifting his giant axe and charging forward like a beast, the ground trembled with each step. Dust flew into the air. The human didn't move, not even an inch. Then, just as Kroger brought down his axe, the human stepped aside. Fast, too fast for the eye to follow, the blade missed, crashing into the stone floor. Shaking the arena, before the crowd could blink, the human drew his sword and moved. There was a flash of light, a sound like air splitting, then silence. Kroger froze, standing tall for a second, then dropped to his knees. A red line appeared. Across his chest, the Titan fell forward, his body split clean in half. The arena went silent, completely still. No one could believe what they had just seen. Princess Valara rose to her feet in shock. Her champion, the undefeatable Kroger, was dead, killed by a single swing, by a human. The human stood still, wiping the blood from his blade with calm movements. He did not gloat, did not bow. He simply turned to the royal balcony and spoke. I am Captain Riker of Earth, he said, his voice loud and clear. By your laws, I now claim what is mine. The princess's face turned pale. The law was ancient and absolute. She could not deny it. The people had seen it with their own eyes. The champion was dead, and Riker was the victor. Guards stepped forward, unsure whether to attack or kneel. The maids stood frozen, exchanging fearful glances. Valara clenched her fists, her pride shattered. Her heart burning with confusion and anger. She was not used to being powerless, but right now, by her own law, she belonged to a human. Captain Riker raised one hand, and the guard stopped. I do not seek slaves, he said calmly. Only peace and the fulfillment of your ancient code. The crowd didn't cheer, didn't move. They were in shock. A human had walked into their sacred arena and defeated a legend without hate. Without rage, just calm skill. Valara looked at him closely. Who was this man? How did he defeat Kroger so easily, and why did he speak like a man who carried not pride, but purpose? She didn't have the answers, but one thing was clear. Everything had changed. Her life, her rule, her world now, belonged to the human with the calm eyes and the deadly blade. And in the heart of the arena, blood still soaked the ground proof that honor, law, and fate had all bent to the will of one quiet warrior from Earth. Asterix's silence held the arena long after the human sword had stilled. No one dared move, not even the guards. Kroger once called the mountain of Ulysses now lay lifeless. Split by a single cut, and standing in the center was the man who changed. Everything. Captain Riker of Earth didn't smile, didn't raise his arms in victory. He simply looked up at the royal balcony and waited. He knew the law, but he also knew the weight it carried. Princess Valara stared down at him, her breath tight in her throat. Around her, nobles whispered in panic. Some demanded the law be ignored. Others feared what would happen if it wasn't, but Valara was not a coward. She was born from royalty. Raised in tradition and trained in war, she would not break the ancient code. No matter how bitter it felt. With a wave of her hand, she signaled the royal herald to speak. The old herald stepped forward, voice echoing through the arena. By the binding law of trial, the victor of the royal duel may claim the house of the fallen. The crowd stirred. The Princess Valara and her maids now belonged to the human who defeated her champion. A low gasp rippled through the audience, followed by silence again. The law had been spoken. It could not be undone. Valara descended from her balcony with the grace of a queen, her long gown flowing behind her. Her maids followed closely, silent, pale, unsure what to expect. The moment her feet touched the ground of the arena, the crowd dropped to their knees. All eyes were on her as she approached the man who had just shattered her life with a single swing. She stopped a few steps away from Riker and stared into his eyes. They were steady, not cruel, not arrogant, just command strange. "Is this what you came for, human?" she asked quietly. Riker shook his head. "I came for peace," Valara narrowed her eyes. "Peace? What kind of warrior says that after claiming a princess and her entire court? He had the right to rule, to conquer, to humiliate, but he chose peace." It made no sense, and that unsettled her more than any blade ever could. "You have claimed me by law," she said coldly. "Then take what you have earned." "I will claim nothing that is not freely given," Riker replied. Gasps echoed again through the arena. The nobles looked at each other in disbelief. What kind of victor refuses? His spoils? But Riker continued. "I challenge a second tradition." Now he had everyone's attention. Riker turned to the crowd, speaking with a voice that carried over the heads of thousands. "My world, Earth, believes in freedom," he said. "I will not bind anyone who does not wish it. I ask the princess and her maids to walk beside me not as slaves, but as allies. I have proven strength. Now I ask for trust." Valara's heart twisted. She didn't understand him. He had power but didn't use it like the warriors of Ulysses. He offered choice where none was needed. Even her own kind would have taken advantage. But this human, this Riker, refused it. Her maids whispered behind her, unsure what to think. One of them, Lyra, a young girl with soft eyes, took a trembling step forward. "I will follow you, human," she said, voice shaking, "if you mean what you say." Riker nodded respectfully. "You have my word." Another maid stepped forward, and then another, one by one. They joined Riker not from fear, but from curiosity, maybe even hope. They had never seen a man win a throne and ask for nothing. Finally, only Valara remained. She looked at her court, at the crowd, and then back at Riker. "I don't trust you," she said softly. "You don't have to," he replied. "Just walk with me long enough to see why others do." For the first time in her life, Princess Valara felt uncertain and curious, not about the law, not about politics, but about the human standing before her. She turned to the crowd, raised her hand, and said, "The law has been honored. But today, it evolves. I will walk beside this human not as his slave, but as his equal." And with that, the old order of Ulysses trembled. Not from war, but from a single choice freely made. The people watched in awe as Valara joined Captain Riker, her crown still on her head. The strange human had not only claimed the throne, he had rewritten the meaning of power itself, and somewhere deep in her chest, The princess felt a strange flutter she had never known before. Not fear, not hate, but something else. Something she would soon discover in the days to come. The royal palace of Ulysses was quiet that night. But the silence was not peace. It was the kind of silence that hides whispers, secrets, and thoughts too dangerous to speak aloud. Captain Riker now walked its golden halls not as a conqueror, but as something far more confusing. A human guest, with power by law, yet no hunger for the throne. And that made him dangerous in a way none of them had expected. Princess Vealara sat alone in her private chamber. Draped in silver robes, her crown set aside, she stared into the flames of the hearth, her mind burning brighter than the fire. He had every right to chain her, to command her, to claim her body and title, but instead he gave her choices. Why? What did he really want? That question echoed louder than war drums. Her maids whispered among themselves in the silk corridors of the palace. Some still feared the human, calling him a trickster in armor of kindness. Others had begun to admire him, curious about his strange ways. Lyra, the youngest maid, now smiled more, her steps lighter since Riker's arrival. She spoke of how he treated her with respect, how he asked questions about Uleron customs, how he listened. Not many men on Ulysses listened to servants, not even nobles, certainly not champions, but Valera didn't trust kindness. She had been raised in a court where smiles were weapons and generosity was poison with perfume. She ordered quiet investigations into Riker's past Earth records, military files, anything her spies could find. But the more she searched, the more confused she became. He was a soldier, yes. He had fought wars, bled, lost comrades, but there were no stories of cruelty, no hunger for power, no betrayals, only a reputation for ending wars faster than they began, and walking away once they were done. Still, she couldn't believe it. He had to be hiding something. No man could carry that much strength and offer that much freedom. It had to be a mask, so she began to test him. She had her advisors challenge him in meetings, using sharp words, old insults, and veiled threats. Riker didn't flinch. Didn't respond with pride or anger. He answered with logic, patience, and humor that angered her more. She sent spies into his guest quarters. Hidden ears to catch secret plans. They found none, only quiet readings, letters from Earth. And one small carved object he kept on his tabla, wooden bird, when asked about it. He said it reminded him of someone he lost, then said no more. One evening, a venomous skycrawler slipped into the palace gardens. The maid screamed and ran as the creature darted toward them, its fangs dripping green death. Before the guards could react, Riker was already there. He didn't use a weapon. He grabbed a broken stick from the garden floor and jabbed it through the creature's head. Fast, brutal, efficient. When the guards arrived, it was over. Lyra looked up at him with awe. "You saved us again," she whispered. Riker just smiled slightly. "I don't like losing people." That moment spread through the palace like wildfire. The story of how the human protected royal maids with nothing but a stick. No orders, no reward, just instinct. And still, Vealara doubted. That night she called Riker to her chamber. She wore no crown, no armor of pride, only soft robes and hard questions. "I've watched you," she said. "You show strength without cruelty, mercy without weakness, power without control. Why?" Riker looked her in the eyes, tired but calm. "Because I've seen what power does to people," he replied, "and I'd rather be trusted than feared." Vealara stared at him for a long time. He didn't lie. She could feel it, and yet that made him even more dangerous, because slowly, without force or demand, he was turning her people toward him, not with fear, but with hope. And hope was a powerful poison for old empires. She dismissed him with a nod. But her thoughts kept racing. She had once believed that walls of silk and gold were stronger than steel. But now she saw that resistance didn't always come with swords. Sometimes it came with questions, patience, and a wooden bird carved by a quiet human from Earth, and deep in the night, while the city slept. Vealara made a silent vow. If Captain Riker truly wanted her trust, she would make him earn it in ways no warrior ever had before. The palace of Ulysses glowed under the twin moons, its towers bathed in silver light. But behind the beauty was unrest. The nobles were uneasy, the generals restless, and the old bloodlines whispered rebellion. A human now walked their sacred halls, not as a prisoner, but as a man of law. To some, that was blasphemy. To others, it was treason. And so, in the dead of night, a silent decision was made. In the shadows of the eastern wing, a figure cloaked. In black slipped past the guards. He moved like smoke, invisible to the eye. He was no common killer. He was one of the Queen's blades. Trained since childhood, his mission was clear and toward the human's chambers. End his life and vanish. No warning, no honor, just death. The nobles had paid well for silence. And the blade was eager to remind the world that humans bled just like anyone else. Captain Riker's chamber was quiet. The lights dimmed, the room still. He lay on a couch, one arm resting behind his head. Eyes closed, the assassin crept closer. Step by step. Every breath measured, blade raised. Just 2 more steps. And the tip of the dagger would find the target's throat. But in the blink of a moment, everything changed. Riker's eyes opened, not with panic, but with awareness. His hand shot out, faster than the assassin thought possible. The killer's wrist was caught midair. Twisted and pulled down with a crack, the blade clattered to the floor. And the assassin found himself face first against the cold marble in 2 moves. The human had disarmed and disabled a warrior trained in secret arts. No sword, no armor, just instinct, speed, and control. The assassin groaned as Riker knelt beside him. Calm as ever. I'm not your enemy, Riker said softly, but I will defend myself. He didn't kill the assassin, didn't call the guards. Instead, he picked up the blade, studied it, then turned the man over. Tell whoever sent you this, Riker said, pressing the cold metal into the assassin's own hand. I see their fear and I understand it. But I won't play their game then. With a firm but painless strike to the back of the neck, the assassin was out cold. Riker stepped back and sighed. Not with anger, but with disappointment. He had hoped his peaceful presence would change minds, not provoke blood. The next morning, word of the failed attempt spread across the palace. Like wildfire, the guards were furious, the nobles silent, the princess unreadable. No one understood why Riker hadn't executed the man, not even Vealara. She confronted him in the sunlit garden, where he often walked alone. You spared him? She asked, trying to hide the tremble in her voice. He was just a message, Riker replied, plucking a leaf from a glowing vine. If I answer violence with violence, I become just another conqueror. Ballarat couldn't believe it. He had power, reason, and every right to strike back, and yet he refused. He stood there, gentle, calm, and dangerous in a way she had never seen before. Not because he could kill, but because he chose not to. You do not act like a man with control, she said quietly. Riker turned to her, eyes steady. That's because I don't want control, I want trust. Valara said nothing, but inside, the walls she had spent years building were starting to shift. Not fall, not yet, but shift. And that was more terrifying than any assassin's blade. That evening, she dismissed her advisors early. She sat in her chamber, staring at the stars. Through the tall crystal windows, she thought of the assassin, the silence of Riker's grip, the mercy in his hands, and for the first time since Kroger's death, she didn't feel rage. She felt confusion, and in that confusion something warmer tried to grow. Something she didn't yet have words for, but deep inside. She understood this. The human was not winning by force. He was winning by being everything her world did not understand, and that was a far more dangerous kind of power. The palace halls were no longer whispering, they were boiling. The failed assassination had only added fuel to a fire that never truly died. Generals sharpened their blades in silence, nobles met in secret chambers, and old families clung tighter. To their ancient pride, to them, Riker was not a guest. He was an infection, one that was spreading through the hearts of the people, through the servants, through the princess herself. But Riker didn't seem to notice or perhaps he chose not to care. He walked the palace like a calm shadow, always alert, always respectful. He asked questions about Uleron traditions, sat with the cooks during meals, and even helped a stable boy fix a broken harness. The palace staff, once cautious, now greeted him with nods and even smiles. He was not like other men, and certainly not like other victors, and that terrified those who had built their power on fear. One morning during the weekly court gathering, Riker stood as a guest, not a ruler. The nobles lined up in silks and metal, wearing their ranks like weapons. General Sarith, the princess's cousin and a war hero, stepped forward, his voice loud and sharp. "I do not bow to a man who hides behind peace," he said. "Real rulers take power. They don't wait for it to be handed." A ripple of gasps echoed across the marble floor. He was challenging Riker publicly, daring him to respond with pride or violence. But Riker only looked at him, then looked at Valara. "I don't need to prove I can break someone to show I'm strong," Riker said calmly. "But insult her again. And I'll show you why I left my sword outside." Gasps turned into stunned silence. The general's face burned with shame. He drew his sword and slammed it to the floor, cracking the marble. Valara rose from her throne, a voice like steel. "Enough," she said. "This court belongs to peace. Now speak with wisdom, or speak never again." She wasn't defending Riker. She was defending a new order. One she wasn't sure she trusted yet, but felt inside her bones was right. That night she summoned Riker to her garden chamber, the place where her mother once taught her how to rule with silence. She stood beside a tree that bloomed only once a year, a tree that symbolized hope and sorrow both. "You could have crushed him," she said, eyes fixed on the petals. "You could have broken his sword, taken his pride, made an example." Riker stood a few steps behind, his voice soft. "I've fought men like him before. I crush his pride. It grows back angrier. But if I protect yours? Maybe it plants a seed." Valara turned, her eyes shimmering with something. "Unspoken? You don't act like a conqueror," she said. "You act like a teacher." Riker smiled faintly. "I don't want students, I want equals." "Then why are you here?" she asked. "Not out of anger, but out of pain. Why?" "Claim me if you don't want to rule me." He stepped closer, but kept a respectful distance. "Because something in your eyes told me you weren't meant to be ruled, you were meant to be seen." That sentence hit her harder than any blade ever had. Her whole life she had been trained to lead through strength, through pride, through armor. But Riker wasn't trying to break her. He was giving her space to remove her armor herself. And that frightened her more than battle ever could. "You still wear your chains," Riker said gently. "You just painted them gold." She didn't respond, not with words. She reached up, clipped the ceremonial collar around her neck, and let it fall to the grass. It wasn't submission. It was the first step toward something new. Not love, not yet, but maybe the crack in the wall. Her pride had built. The next morning, the court expected her to tighten her grip, to push back, to remind everyone of who she was. Instead, she walked beside Riker. Not behind him, not ahead of him, but beside him. No chains, no orders, just quiet, undeniable presence. The maids watched in awe, and the nobles whispered again, but this time, not with rage, but with confusion, maybe even curiosity. And as the princess walked through her palace with a human at her side, she realized something terrifying. She had not lost her power. She had found a new kind, one that didn't come from fear, but from something stronger, something slower, something human. Uleris had known wars that burned across star systems. It had seen duels that shook entire cities, and rulers who rose through rivers of blood, but it had never seen a battle like this. One fought not with swords or fire, but with words, glances, and the silence between them. And in the middle of this quiet war stood Princess Valoran, the human who refused to conquer her. The palace looked the same on the outside, but everything inside had changed. The guards still stood at their posts. The nobles still whispered in corners, but now they whispered about her. She was no longer the untouchable Ice Queen who watched champions die in her name. She was walking beside a man from a distant world, a man who had every right to command her but didn't, and somehow that made her feel more exposed than standing naked in front of the galaxy. She needed answers, so she issued a challenge. Not with weapons, but with honesty. One week, she said to Riker, her tone sharp but uncertain. One week where I ask whatever I want, test you however I wish. And you don't lie, don't run, and don't touch me. Riker looked her in the eyes and nodded. Agreed. Day one, she asked him about Earth, not the maps or flags, but the people. He spoke of crowded cities, oceans that sang in storms, forests that whispered secrets older than time. She listened, silent, her head tilted. His voice painted pictures, strange, colorful, real, and in those stories she saw. Not a soldier, but a man who missed home. Day two, she watched him train, not for show, but for discipline. His movements were sharp, focused, almost like a dance. He didn't train for power, he trained for control. Something about the way he moved made her breath catch in her throat. It wasn't lust, it was awe. He was human, but carried himself like something more. Day three, she told him about her childhood, how she was raised in silence, taught to never cry, trained to never need. Riker didn't offer pity, he simply listened. And that was worse than any sympathy, because it made her feel seen, and she wasn't sure she was ready for that. Day four, she tested him. She sent two of her most cunning advisors to provoke him with lies. Accusations, even insults. He never raised his voice, never threatened. He dismantled their logic like a surgeon, clean, calm, deadly, and afterward, he simply left without saying a word to her. She watched him go, her chest tight with something. She couldn't name day five. She followed him, unseen. He went to the garden, sat near the tree where her mother was buried. He placed a small object on the roots, a carved bird made of wood, and whispered something. Too quiet to hear. Then he just sat there, head bowed, alone. Velara turned away before her heart betrayed her face. Day six. She invited him to dine in her private hall. No guards, no nobles, no armor. Just 2 cups of glowing wine, and a low fire between them. They didn't speak of war or power that night. They spoke of books, of stars, of small things that didn't matter, but somehow mattered more than anything else. When she laughed, really laughed, she covered her mouth out of reflex. Riker smiled and said, "You should never hide that." And something inside her cracked. A little more. Day 7 arrived like a storm. She stood in her balcony, the wind tangling her hair, the sun setting in twin gold. Riker stood below, ready to leave. If she gave the word, the week was over. The challenge complete, she could send him away, take back her rule, end the confusion in her heart, but instead, she walked down the stairs, slowly, as if each step was part of something ancient and sacred. She stood before him and said, "You've defeated every wall I built. I've won nothing, Riker." Replied, "You opened the gates yourself." She reached out, her hand trembling. Not from fear, but from the weight of her pride finally falling. He didn't move, didn't breathe, just waited. She placed her hand on his chest and whispered, "I don't understand what this is, but I want to know." And in that moment, the most unshakable woman in the Empire surrendered. Not her body, not her crown, but her heart. Not to power, not to law, but to the quiet strength of a human who never once tried to own her. And across the stars, something ancient shifted. A battle ended not in blood, but in trust, and that victory would echo louder than any war ever could. The twin suns rose slowly over Ularis, painting the sky in gold and fire. But this dawn was not like others. It came without war drums, without shouting crowds, without the clash of metal on stone. It came with silence, soft and warm, like the breath of a world finally exhaling, and in that silence stood a human man unarmed, uncrowned, unchained. Captain Riker of Earth had claimed no throne, yet somehow ruled hearts across a world not his own. The palace that once held cold walls and colder rulers now hummed with quiet change. Servants smiled openly, nobles whispered less and listened more. Even the old guards began to relax their grip on their spears. Not out of laziness, but out of trust, because something strange had taken root in Ularis. Not fear, not control, something gentler. Slower, stronger, princess. Valoras stood at the edge of the grand balcony. Dressed in robes that flowed like liquid dusk, her crown rested on the pedestal beside her. Untouched, she no longer wore it every day. She didn't need to. Her presence now commanded more respect than her title ever did. And at her side, not. Behind or ahead stood Riker, not as her master, not even as her consort, but as something the Empire had no word for. An equal who had earned her heart without ever asking for it. The council chamber met in full that day. All houses were present, some proud, some cautious, all curious. Valara rose, her voice clear and calm. I was once taught that strength came from taking, ruling, and winning through force, she said. But a human came and showed me a different strength, the kind that asks nothing and gives everything. Whispers rippled through the room, but no one interrupted. She continued. He broke our champion, yes, but more importantly, he broke our silence, our pride, and our fear, and from that, something new has grown. She turned to Riker, who nodded once, a silent agreement between two who had shared more in silence than others shared in years of speech. He stepped forward. Not with a proclamation, but with a question. Will your world choose strength through kindness? Asked. Or will you wait for another sword to teach you the same lesson again? There was no applause, no shouting, just a heavy, thoughtful stillness. It was the first time the council had ever heard a man speak without asking to be obeyed, and yet every word stayed in their bones like firelight in winter. After the meeting, the crowd outside the palace watched as Valara walked among them, not carried, not guarded, just walking free. Riker followed at a respectful pace, watching but never leading. Children ran beside them. Mothers bowed with tears. Old warriors nodded in quiet respect. No crown was placed on Riker's head. No title burned into gold. But the people called him something anyway, the crownless one, not because he lacked power, but because he no longer needed a symbol to prove he had it. In the days that followed, trade reopened, old feuds settled, and strange new ideas flowed into the Empire. Ideas from Earth, quality, peace, shared rule, and soft strength. Ideas planted by a man who had once stepped into an alien arena and ended a monster with a single swing, not to conquer but to change at night in the garden of the blooming tree. Riker and Valara would sit in silence, no throne between them, no armor on their hearts. Just two people from different stars who had fought the greatest war of all, one inside themselves. And one, sometimes she would reach for his hand and say nothing. He would squeeze it gently and say less, and yet, in that quiet, they ruled more deeply than any empire ever could. So when the stars wrote the tale of Ularis, they did not speak only of blood and victory, they spoke of the human who refused to take what was his, and in doing so, was given more than he ever imagined. And they told of a princess who was never truly conquered, only finally seen. Together, they built not a kingdom of gold, but a legacy of light, a crownless kingdom, where trust ruled and love was the final law,